The third Isle of Man Government Conference took place last week, and while the event was light on big announcements, it was certainly informative to those who attended. Perspective this week talks to some of the speakers from the second day of the conference. Want to know more about the man tasked with delivering over £10 million of savings? Interested to know why we're suddenly more focused on security? We'll have all the answers later in the programme, but first, why was the Treasury Minister relatively low-key and flat in his speech?
I think that's your perception, and I wouldn't disagree with it. I got the morning shift, the 8:30 to 9:30, talking about budgets and public sector reform. And really, what I was trying to do is paint the picture of where we were in February when we did the budget, where we are now, because obviously we've had the announcement of the Manx Care overspend. That's got a lot of people very worried, but there are other departments with similar issues, not to that extent, but we know Department for Infrastructure, Department for Enterprise, Department for Education are all having pressures with their budgets. And so what I was trying to do is make sure that the general public and the people in the audience knew that we were aware to this, what we were doing about it in terms of scrutiny panels and trying to drill down what the reasons were, and that we were being serious with trying to get the Isle of Man expenditure back on budget and trying to do that fiscal responsibility that we keep on talking about and showing it in action halfway through the financial year.
The obvious thing that a journalist like me would then have to ask is, we're 3 years into this administration. Why are we just beginning to talk about financial prudence and driving through efficiencies in the public service? Surely this should have been a day one issue.
Well, we're not. I disagree with you. This has been going on throughout the administration, and you'd know from your previous experience, Treasury have always asked the why and always said no to things. What we are doing now is being absolutely honest and I think an awful lot more transparent with people about the state of government finances. So I gave a commitment to publish the quarterly management accounts, and we're going to be doing that. We're going to leave that probably until next week or the week after, showing exactly where we are in the financial year in terms of the income and expenditure. Because that's what people wanted to see, rather than wait until the end of the year and say so-and-so's overspent or so-and-so's underspent. They want that real-time reassurance that government is doing what it's meant to be doing. So I think we've always been doing that. What we're doing now, I suppose, in the internet era when everyone can go online and see almost anything, is trying to reassure people that we are in control of the finances, that we are taking it seriously, that when overspends happen, we're aware of it straight away. We don't wait until the year end. We start tackling it straight away, and we can actually explain how and why we're doing that.
It's quite alarming, I think, for people who don't know how government works to be told as we were by Andy Ralphs, that we're starting to get to a position where we have good, believable data, that it's difficult sometimes to compare different departments because they use different reporting systems. We've had computers now for many decades. Surely to goodness these sorts of things should have been resolved by now.
They have been resolved in areas. They are being resolved now with more digitalisation. I think the complexity of the Isle of Man government is vast. We are a relatively small country, population of 85,000, but the government does just about everything, from running horse trams to dealing with money val. And so the amount of different information, the amount of different budgets, the amount of different responsibilities, some of them are statutory as well, it can be quite overwhelming sometimes when you look at it. And so trying to have a one-size-fits-all doesn't work. What DOI will need to run the buses will be completely different, for instance, to us running financial services in terms of their regulation. But what we are doing is trying to get that unified approach to benefit from automation, drive down the expenditure we have in terms of administering government, as well as increasing efficiency and productivity. And that productivity is key, both in terms of government and the private sector as well as we go forward.
You will know that for much of the last 16 years since the 200 million hit to VAT, government departments have been being squeezed, and in some cases squeezed quite hard. how are we going to? How is Andy Ralphs, the chief officer, going to be able to deliver at least £10 million worth of savings out of an already squeezed public service, in which Andy Ralphs said there are no civil servants who are not being incredibly productive?
I mean, prior to the seismic change that happened in terms of government finance, you could argue that government at the time was profligate and was trying to do everything for everyone and needed to draw back anyway. That was inevitable. That sooner or later the good times, they don't normally go on forever. There have been significant cutbacks. There have been significant cutbacks both in terms of the civil service but also public services and how they're either delivered or how they're charged for as well. And you've talked to me in the past about stealth taxes and introducing charges and fees for things that used to be free, i.e. people didn't pay for it, but there was still a cost to them. In terms of Andy Ralph's role, I suppose it is looking at that overall linking up different departments, getting them working together, sharing best practice, trying to look at automation. Yes, that's panacea for everything really, but also trying to look at the things we should continue to do. There were some areas where we need to do more to protect the environment, to protect people, to protect our economy, and some areas where we do probably need to do less and step back from. And that's not necessarily a cut in public services, but it's certainly that rationalisation and saying that we can't continue to do everything for everyone, and that realisation that is difficult to communicate and particularly difficult to get the political backing for sometimes.
No politician worth their salt wants to talk about cuts, but when you have such a sort of an issue that we have, and what would appear to be the case, that the hoped for growth in the Manx economy, which would increase tax take and all the things that go with that, has not been as successful as you'd hoped. Certainly you announced today that income hadn't quite been at the level you were hoping for. Inevitably, you're going to have to start thinking about cutting services. I
mean, yeah, what I was trying to be today was realistic. Now, when you look at the UK growth figures, they're flatlining. They're not going into recession yet, but they're flatlining. We've seen the same in America. Our growth rates were forecast by Moody's to be about 1.5% this year, and we are seeing growth in terms of the housing market. Although that's levelled off, we are seeing growth in terms of jobs, but that's not keeping up with the massive increase in costs, particularly in terms of wage bills, supplies, raw materials that government are facing, as is every household and every business on the Isle of Man. So it is cutting a cloth, really, to suit your budget. And I think we have to be rational and honest with the Isle of Man public about that we cannot continue to live beyond our means. We've got a plan to reduce the drawdown on reserves, but government have been saying that for the last couple of years in between COVID and wars in Ukraine. We need to be realistic and sensible about it and honest about that. And I think, this government will seize that and will go forward, but it's not going to be easy at times, but what it needs to be is explained and communicated properly.
And, of course, the one thing that we didn't really talk about, although it has sort of shadowed the whole conference, was the Chief Minister's statement in which he expressed his concern about the overspend in the Health Department. I suppose the thing that certainly surprised me, maybe it surprised others, was that health didn't get a look in at this conference. I'm guessing that had the Health Minister been presenting, he would have been able to tell us of quite significant successes with the money that's being spent. Well, first of all, why was health not at the conference? And then the second question, how big a threat to the ongoing financial security of the Isle of Man is that, I suppose, huge ever-increasing budget that the Health Minister has control over?
Well, first of all, I didn't do the agenda for this conference, but it's based very much on the reset of the Island Plan which happened earlier on in the year, which was really concentrating on things like connectivity, on things like security in its broader sense. That was the key themes of this. And obviously we've seen over the summer that really coming true with some concerns about connectivity, both in terms of flights, but also in terms of the ferry services, often to do with things outside our control, but people want government to respond properly. And we've also seen security concerns. The Chief Constable's report has just been published this week and will be debated in October, Tynwald. There's a lot of threats to our island, as well as threats in terms of climate change, as well as threats in terms of our economy and the way it's seen by the outside world and money value and everything like that. So I think it's absolutely right we discuss those. I mean, in terms of healthcare spending, some of the statements made across by the health minister in the United Kingdom are very apt here as well, that they've seen healthcare spending increasing incrementally, but without that drive in productivity, that people haven't seen the benefits of it, and so they're looking at major structural reform. Now, we were there already with the debate about the set-up of Manx Care, of trying to reform the health service, putting it into an arm's length body, trying to drive those efficiencies, but also provide better services. If Laurie Hooper was here, I think he would say about the benefits that's brought, and he has in Tynwald as well, in terms of reduction of waiting lists, the extra services that have been provided, but it comes at a cost. And now, on the back of Manx Care's announcement of their projected overspends that we have been charting through in Treasury for the last couple of months, we need to have a coherent response to that in terms of working with the department and with Manx Care to make sure that they deliver value for money.
Because we are running out of easily accessible bits of the reserves, aren't we?
In terms of our reserves, we've got £1.83 billion. That sounds a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but a large proportion of that is ring-fenced in terms of the National Insurance Fund. And so we've got around about 600 million in terms of the accessible reserves, which are there. And all of this is available on the economic dashboard that we published. And so that is finite, and that needs topping up, and that's the medium-term financial plan. The issue with drawdowns, if you do a capital programme, it's a one-off. So, overspends on the prom or on Liverpool is a one-off, and we apologise and try to make it right, but it's a one-off. When you have overspends in terms of a department like health, it's every year from then on. If you overspend, for instance, with your wage bill by £20 million, it's not just £20 million that year, it's then £30 million the year after and £40 million the year after that. And that's where some of these overspends in some of the big departments like health, education, DOI, if they're to do with ongoing revenue expenditure, can become an existential threat to our reserves and to our overall economy. And that's why we're taking it extremely seriously, to guarantee that we've got a budget for the medium-term financial plan, but a budget for the future as well.
And one of the things that was discussed following the budget this year was that the tax increase was most likely going to be replaced by a health levy. When are we going to find out more about that?
You'll find out more about it as we start debating in Tynwald the overall structure and function of the National Insurance Fund and the National Insurance Scheme and next year's budget. I'm still doing an awful lot of work. We're still very much at the option stage, because what I don't want to do is impose more taxes on people. What I don't want to do is create issues for the various sectors in our economy which are already in difficulty, like working families, like people on low incomes, or like some of the businesses we're trying to attract here. So we're looking at we're constantly looking at a range of options in terms of supplementing and replacing that 2% on the high rate of income tax, and we'll be presenting those in the budget next year once I've managed to get them through the Council of Ministers, who are obviously looking at me, wanting me to make absolutely certain that we don't do anything in the short term that's detrimental to the long-term economy of our island.
And, of course, you mentioned the National Insurance Fund. It is substantial. You have the opportunity to spend some of that on, I think you'd struggle to spend it on anything other than health and care related issues, but that is an option, isn't it?
That's an option. In the past, Tynwald have been very reticent for what they see as a raid on the fund, and one of the things we'll be doing over the next couple of months is trying to explain what the fund's there for. The fund doesn't pay people's pensions. That's actually the amount of national insurance coming in. The fund has been built up by previous administrations, including the one you were involved in. Thank you very much, because if it hadn't been for that fiscal prudence in the past, we wouldn't have an NI fund. And in the UK, they don't. What comes in goes out, and it's paid for, and they can borrow extra money in those years where they've got more outgoings than ingoings. We don't have that, and we shouldn't have that. So we've built up an NI fund. I'm keen that actually, rather than it being siphoned off to spend in terms of revenue, it is invested properly. And so we've gone through a very, very lengthy process in terms of looking at how we can get the best out of our investments. What I'd like to do is see how some of those investments could be steered to investing in the Isle of Man infrastructure to get a return for the fund, rather than putting it into infrastructure projects in the adjacent Isle or around the world. And so that's one of the other things we'll be talking to Tynwald about, is the best use of that fund and how we can guarantee its long-term sustainability.
Andy Ralphs is government's Chief Executive Officer, and he's just been tasked with squeezing another 10 million saving out of the public service he leads.
So yeah, my role was split from the Chief Secretary, so me being the Chief Executive Officer, leading the public service across the Isle of Man, and really my role is to lead, make sure we're efficient, make sure that we've got the right strategies and policies in place, and we deliver the outcomes that the Council of Ministers agreed in terms of the island plan. The Chief Operating Officer, Megan, so she is responsible then for the delivery and policy aspirations of the island, and leads pretty much what I would call the corporate centre of government.
And in terms of that new role, you have been tasked with what appears, I'm guessing to most people, as a relatively modest task of squeezing £10 million out of public services, but I'm guessing for most of the people who work for the public service, who work across government, they will be thinking, where on earth are we going to find another £10 million to be able to deliver the aspirations of the Council of Ministers?
Yeah, so, I mean, just put that in context. I mean, obviously the Chief Minister has set a task for me to find at least £10 million worth of efficiencies. Departments are already squeezed in terms of their budgets this year. The amount of money they've got to spend to deliver their services is always challenged. So they already have cost improvement plans in place. I think the areas that we can focus on over the next year or so will be, better digitisation, looking at our processes, smarter procurement, strengthening our corporate centre, and making sure that our processes are efficient as they can be. Taking waste out of the system as well. So I call it failure demand, where people are having to contact us multiple times about the same question because our systems aren't efficient. So I think there's broad opportunities, and there is a wider conversation, obviously, to have with the public and our communities, but also with the staff that work for the Isle of Man government, to see where some of those efficiencies will be driven from. But I'm really confident that there is opportunity. It's not about reducing staff numbers, although as we become more efficient, obviously that will impact the amount of people that work for the public sector, but we will do that in a responsible and a controlled way. And like other parts of the island's economy, we are holding a huge amount of vacancies as well. So most of the improvements will done through natural efficiency and natural attrition, rather than I don't want people to be worried there's a massive redundancy drive here. This is not what we're doing. We're just making government more efficient and making sure that we provide services in the most cost efficient way in the future.
The private sector, of course, always point to the public sector and say, look, it's growing like topsy. I mean, there was questions from the floor suggesting approaching 1 in 4 of the employed people in the Isle of Man work for government. Is there a way in which more could be done external to government? Do we have to have public servants doing all the roles that they currently are employed to do?
So the simple answer to that is no. We don't have to, we don't have to just have the public service delivering. There is a role for the community. There's a role for the private sector. There's a role in terms of arm's length organisations. We've already seen that with the Steam Packet and Manx Care. So there are further opportunities that we will look at in the future. I think the important thing is to remember that the private sector, they will have a role in helping us deliver services in the future, but again, that isn't a golden bullet. I think I'll go back to my starting point, which is the first thing we've got to do is get our own house in order. Because the danger is if we don't make it efficient, the private sector will make it efficient for us, and sort of outsourcing a problem isn't the best approach. So it's my role and Chief Officer's role to make the public service efficient, and then once we've done that, then we can look at the role of the public sector and the private sector, and see how they can support us.
One question from the floor was, if we've got people like you doing all this wonderful stuff, why do we actually need ministers? And I thought you answered it in the way that you would expect from a civil servant.
Perhaps I would give a politician's answer. I mean, the role of the politicians is very clear, and my role is very clear, and there's a red line between the two. So my role is to make sure that the civil service is led in the most efficient way, and it's for the politicians to make those big strategic decisions that affect the island as a whole and to set policy, and it is my job then to deliver that alongside the civil service.
And again, I'm not sure whether you're going to be willing to answer this question or not, but obviously you've had experience in a senior role in working for a council in England. How much of a frustration is political interference in relation to operational matters when it comes to the sorts of roles that you're trying to fulfil?
So, I mean, first to say, I mean, I joined the public sector from the private sector in 2004. I've worked in the UK civil service, UK local government, and sometimes it is a frustration, but I think there is a creative tension between both politicians and civil servants. I think the public sector can sometimes be misunderstood that, civil servants are there actually leading the island. That's not true. The politicians lead policy for the island, and like I say, it's for us to deliver. I don't get frustrated. I mean, sometimes I get really frustrated about the length of time it takes to get decisions made, but that's good governance. It's how any political system works in any jurisdiction. So frankly, I've got used to it over the years. But we try and work together. Sometimes we don't agree, and we have to agree to disagree on certain matters, but in the main we work together for the best outcomes of the island or the jurisdiction that we're working in.
And that length of time that it takes to get decisions out of government. I mean, okay, ministers, Tynwald, that does have to consider all a range of different things, but particularly public opinion, but a whole load of other things as well. As a civil servant, though, when it comes to things that are within your operational control, do you think that the current level of response to the public is okay? Does it need improvement? Is that something you're hoping to work on?
We don't always get it right. Have to be humble, and nobody gets it right all of the time. The level of response that we currently give is based on the resource that we've got, and sometimes I know that's frustrating for communities when they want things actioned really quickly, but we have to prioritise what we're doing and prioritise responses. What I talked about today was setting a new customer strategy, and we will talk to communities about that, but how we deliver service, the standards of service they can expect, the service levels that we can afford. So we try and do our best with the resources we got. Obviously, it's sometimes moving people around to do different tasks depending on what's happening today, but we try our best.
And you set out some key areas of action. Some of them seemed familiar to seasoned political commentators. How well? I mean, you're going to tell me that you're going to be successful, aren't you? But how difficult a task do you think you've actually got in terms of the revision and improvement to delivery of public services that you've been tasked with? I mean,
the first thing to say is, don't bite off more than you chew. So I say, focus on a set of deliverables, and we will get to task on those. I think the wider challenge around government reform and how we structure government, obviously that is going to take many years to achieve, because people are involved, decisions that have to be taken politically. It will be a big task. Jurisdictions have done this, but like I said, whether we were to reconsider a single legal entity or a different shape and size of government or a different structure within our own operating conditions as they are today, that requires, engagement with staff, engagement with trade unions, engagement with the public. So don't expect this all to happen overnight. It will be a programme of change over a number of years. Just considering a single legal entity where others have moved to that sort of model has taken 5 or 6 years at huge cost. So for me, it's not just about moving the deck chairs for the sake of it. It's actually about what's the problem we're trying to resolve and how do we best resolve it, and what resource and capability do we need. Undoubtedly, when we start to think about digital and AI and advancing technologies, we won't necessarily have all that expertise currently on the island. So we will look to external resource and other capabilities to help us drive that change. But it requires everybody to get behind change. And part of my role is to make sure people feel involved in it, people feel part of it, and if they feel part of it, generally you'll deliver much successful outcomes. And what we set out today in terms of where we might make changes, we might go some way down the path and think this isn't really working, so you have to change tack. So transformation is a bit of a mute word for me, because business, government's always trying to evolve. So I think we will set out some sensible steps. We will look at things like smart procurement, digitisation, strengthening the corporate centre, looking at spans and layers of management across the organisation, how we become more efficient more generally, and we'll get the organisation behind that and drive that change through over, the next 3 to 5 years.
And there were a couple of one bit of humour, one perhaps bit of humour, I don't know. You were asked how long you were going to be here for, and bearing in mind the success rate of chief officers in recent years, you were very confident to say you'll be here for more than 2 years. I'm 52, or coming up to 52, and when I came to the island, I came to commit to the island, and I'm hoping this will be my last role, if I'm absolutely honest. I did have an opportunity to go out to the Middle East alongside this role, but I chose the Isle of Man because I thought there's a lot I can do, a lot I can give. I'm actually from the West Country in the UK as well, and it's very similar in terms of its makeup and its beauty. So this is where I've chosen to settle, and for as long as the islands will have me, I will remain. Government CEO Andy Ralphs. Next up, the Justice and Home Affairs Minister Jane Poole-Wilson.
So I think, Phil, in the sense that there's been a lot of law enforcement activity that has identified the changing nature of the threat to the Isle of Man around serious and organised criminality and so on. I think, yes, that has been evolving, and we've known that there is a problem that we need to make sure that we're tackling appropriately. And I think that's why when the refreshed Island Plan was published and debated in March this year, you will have seen that security was one of the strategic priorities for the Island Plan for this year. The opportunity I wanted to take today was really to put some meat on the bones, because quite often people say, well, you produce a strategy or you say there's an intention to do something, but what actually do you do? And I wanted to really take the opportunity to say, well, actually, this is what has been happening. This is what's still in train or under development, and roughly when we're targeting to make sure it's in place, and also some of the other work that we might want to look to do in the future, so that people have a good understanding of what the actual changes are and the actions that are being taken.
And in terms of the problem that this is supposedly addressing, how big a problem actually is this? I mean, people coming into the island that we don't want to be coming into the island, and perhaps bringing things in that we don't want. Is this a major problem? I mean, is it something that people are crying out for change for?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, because and somebody made the point during the question and answer session that, the illegal drugs market is not a new phenomenon. I think what we have seen, particularly once travel really opened up again after COVID, is the extent to which serious and organised criminals, particularly in the northwest of England, but not exclusively, see the Isle of Man as a lucrative market, with prices for drugs typically being 3 times higher than they could attract in the UK. And I think the other thing is, as an island, I mean, in the common travel area, part of our freedoms, if we like, is that free ability to move. But sadly, those who would seek to bring quite serious criminality to the Isle of Man will exploit that freedom of movement. And I think the other thing that we are increasingly aware of is that with that type of serious and organised crime often will come associated harm. So behind the headlines of some of the attacks that we see in the press, what is sitting behind that is a story of drug debt enforcement through quite ruthless means. So I think it would be a mistake, I think, for us to assume that some of the problems that we see elsewhere have not and would not continue to arrive at our door. And therefore, I think actions to and it's not new in that it's an evolving situation, I would say. The law enforcement agencies, particularly the police, but also customs and immigration, have carried out a number of operations, I think dating back to Operation Strongbox, but then we've had Achilles and Artemis, well publicised, people convicted, illegal drugs and cash seized. Those things have happened. What we are recognising, though, is as a threat to the island and the risk, particularly to our citizens, it's important to move to a more sustained and comprehensive approach that allows us to continue to keep pace with the evolving types of threat we see.
Yesterday, 2 police officers walked past. One looked to me as though he had a handgun. That doesn't make me feel secure. That made me feel, is there some security threat to this conference?
The Chief Constable, we do ask him to keep on top of all intelligence and potential threats and risks, and then to try and make operational decisions to deploy resource appropriately to meet those threats and risks. So what matters is that we can have confidence that he is able to respond, even when it's appropriate to have an armed response or to have that level of security. I think the other context is, we are the Isle of Man. We've always prided ourselves on being a safe place, but for the same reasons we recognise that there are those who would choose to exploit our borders and with some quite serious criminality.
That was Minister Jane Poole-Wilson, finally the Chief Minister. The conference has drawn to a conclusion. What were you hoping to have got out of the conference, and what do you think you actually have got out of it?
Well, so we initially determined that a government conference was a good way to communicate with people effectively at the start of the political year, and what we know is the sort of start of the school year. They happen to coincide, and of course an opportunity also for government departments and ministers to explain their policies, how they're tackling the issues of the day, and of course explain what they want to achieve in the future. And of course, to be able to do that effectively, of course we'll be communicating to a live audience of whoever's in the room, but also effectively communicate to the broader island through the media, social media, and using as much of the existing tools that we have to reach out to as many people as possible, so that they too, I hope, can be part of that explanation and that communication.
And of course it's quite a useful exercise for the people being asked to present, because they have to then think quite seriously about what it is that they are actually doing, and how do they communicate that to the public.
So from an internal exercise, if you like, in terms of asking people to think about what their role is in meeting the objectives that the government has set through the Island Plan, it is indeed, I would say, a very useful exercise. Even I can sit there as a third party in the audience and listen to the explanations being given, understand perhaps more about what is happening in terms of some of the difficulties that are being faced, but also I hope then we can all draw out how things align in terms of everybody working towards the common goal of producing better services and delivering a better future for us all. And of course, a lot of that does tie into the economy and the economic strategy.
I don't know whether you can share these sorts of insights with us, but if you can, was there anything particular that you've learned during the course of the 2 days that you were unaware of before, and you thought, right?
Well, you're always learning, Phil. Government's a big organisation. Delivery of public services stretches across many, many different parts of the public sector, extends into the third sector and indeed into parts of the private sector. And part of the idea of the conference was that it was a chance to understand and to learn as well, and to take away new ideas and greater understanding. And whether that was from discussing what's been presented or what's been delivered in terms of speeches or presentations from members of the private sector or the public who are there, or whether that is indeed learning something from somebody who's on stage presenting, that was, and should be part of this. So yes, you're always learning, and you need to try and take away some of that. And yes, it does help reshape some of the thinking. And we need to then take that away and then translate that into revised efforts or put it into the island plan and readjust where perhaps we can see areas for improvement as a result of that thinking, all those conversations that have taken place.
Of course, the elephant in the room is the announcement that you made in relation to the overspend of the health department, particularly Manx Care. There wasn't really an opportunity for us during the conference to understand what's causing that overspend, what are the successes of Manx Care, because undoubtedly if you're throwing the sort of money that's being put into Manx Care, there are successes. Waiting lists are down, the significant improvement in terms of cancer treatments, things like this. These are positive things, aren't they?
Yeah, there's been a lot of positives, and indeed, Manx Care has made progress in many areas. We've also put in an additional £18.3 million into a restoration and recovery programme ourselves to help Manx Care, and completed thousands of operations through that programme. It doesn't detract from the fact, though, that we need financial discipline, and we need we need departments to stay within their allocated budgets, whether it's health, whether it's education, whoever it is, because the government finances and the medium-term financial plan, are predicated on discipline, and also, of course, predicated on assumed financial circumstances, economic circumstances around us as well. And so changes to that can knock that off track. And so we've had this change in terms of the size of the overspend versus taken into consideration all the additional money and the tax rise that was put into Manx Care in February. And therefore we need to actually ourselves understand where all the money has gone, who's got complete oversight and control of this, and what needs to be done to recorrect that position. Before then, we understand what else we have to do to examine in terms of where else healthcare funding is going to come from, and how else that is going to be paid for. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that by itself has effectively, I guess, driven now an increased urgency for the need for government itself to deliver efficiencies as well. We can't just point the finger at healthcare now. We've got to move forward, I would say, at a greater pace in delivering clearer efficiencies immediately, but also, and hence the £10 million announcement, but also get greater clarity on productivity, and particularly what that means for digital investment and how we can effectively use technology to improve services for people, given all the pressures that we talk about when it comes to the demographic issues that we and many other Western countries are looking to face up to.
I haven't seen the Health Minister at the conference. Is his role secure, I suppose, is the first question. And do you perhaps understand why he might feel a little aggrieved that such a big topic as health doesn't appear on the agenda?
Well, we set out to focus really about the economy and the contribution from the private sector to that, and how government services needed to adjust to be as streamlined as possible, both in terms of delivery of service, but also making sure that the public sector and public finances were adjusted and were being delivered appropriately in order to support our economic growth, because it's all very much part of that, Phil. And so we can only put so much into an agenda. We've only got limited space. One of the issues we found at the Villa Marina was that actually you'd have your main conference hall, but put on other events in other parts of the building, and very often people would want to go to those particular events, and the main hall would often be empty. So trying to deliver absolutely a proper focus on absolutely every part of government's operations isn't possible, and we do need to provide some focus. So I don't think the fact that healthcare was not on the agenda was a major issue. And in fact, I would argue that both, particularly the big departments, education and healthcare, the public front-facing areas, should be out delivering, whether it's open days or whether it is specific sort of almost conference-like facilities for nursing, doctors, or healthcare delivery. So that communication should be happening constantly throughout the year, in any case.
And uniquely sidestepped has the Health Minister got a long-term future in the government?
Yeah, of course. We try to solve problems and move forward together. Not really want to sort of point fingers at people. We know there's an issue. The point is, it's not just a healthcare issue. This reflects into the stability of our long-term plans for financial stability, and also could have quite a significant impact on reserves. That position, is delicately balanced, and therefore it does become a matter of national importance for me, for Council of Ministers, and therefore it does need a national oversight. And so the important thing is that we all understand why this isn't just about healthcare delivery, but the importance of the repercussions if we don't get this under financial control. And secondly, because of that significance, it is a significant matter for the Treasury Minister. Of course, it's a matter for the Health Minister. It's also a matter for the Council of Ministers, because we all recognise there are inherent risks of failing to, both get this under control, but be clear about how it is managed into the future as well.
The Treasury Minister, in his presentation, talked about the importance of a cohesive and collaborative Council of Ministers, that you were very speaking with one voice, that you were working as a team. Is that the case?
Absolutely. I think I've been clear that we never wanted and expect Council of Ministers not to be engaged in robust decision making or to robustly examine the issues. But once we've determined a way forward, then we unite behind that and we get on and deliver. And we all share a common goal in terms of both understanding many of the challenges that the island is facing, but also understanding that we can set the foundations for a better future for the island, and the economic plan outlines very much how to do that, but we also recognise that we've got to improve public service delivery, and we've got to plan for the future. And we all recognise there is a real need to set a clear agenda around reforming public services to deliver for the future as well. So yes, Council is united, and some of the plans we've got and some of the headline targets that have been set need clearer transparency, need the papers behind them for Council and for Tynwald to vote on. But yeah, we're clear as a council about what needs to be done and how it needs to be delivered. Some of the detail, though, needs to be put behind that at the moment.
Andy Ralphs, of course, gave another interesting presentation. He is tasked, along with the rest of the chief officers, in delivering at least a £10 million saving across government, presumably from April 2025. He also, though, said that he felt that every civil servant was incredibly busy. There was no slack in the system. So either the system's going to have to change or services are going to be cut. Does the... well, certainly in the past, politicians, when push comes to shove, have been reluctant to actually cut any services. So presumably that leaves some kind of reform in terms of the way in which you do business.
So first of all, I mean, I don't like the term just cut services. I think that we need to reform the way that we deliver services, and we do need to understand whether it's appropriate for direct taxpayer subvention and payment for these areas, or whether actually it is a different model in some of the perhaps services you might regard as non-essential. I think what the important thing is now is yes, we've set this £10 million efficiency target. The senior officers will be tasked to work on that, and of course we'll deliver how that will be found over the next 12 months or in the next budget. What I also want to do is to use this opportunity to determine within government itself whether there are short-term reorganisation opportunities in terms of where services have been delivered, which departments are delivering those services, whether they can be amalgamated elsewhere and on the basis of delivering better outcomes for the public, but be delivered in a more effective and efficient way. And I think the third part of this is that transparency and overview about how public services can digitalise more efficiently and effectively. And I talked to you at some length, probably 2 years ago now, about how we were going to create an operations performance board. So that board is up and running. We've got two, I would say, very experienced non-executive directors or non-executive advisors assisting us in that, both of whom have extensive private sector experience in the digital and technology world, and I'm hoping that we can leverage that to provide some more clarity and transparency about how we can digitise more effectively and efficiently. So there's a lot to be done here, Phil. Immediate priorities, financial discipline, get ourselves back on track with our finances, particularly when it comes to healthcare spending. Need to understand what healthcare spending looks like moving forward as well, in terms of how people pay for that. Yes, we need to be looking at some of the services that are being delivered, because particularly in healthcare, they've got a very, very wide mandate at the moment, and that may need some revision, certainly in the short term. The rest of government's efficiencies, whether to streamline areas within some departments, and then a digitisation programme as well, and that needs to be lifted out from, perhaps, it is taking place in some parts of government. I think that needs to be lifted up to a higher level so that we can all understand exactly what government is investing in and how that's going to deliver. Most important thing, it makes life easier for people to get things done and to communicate with the public sector, and we must never forget that ultimately must be the final outcome for any of these programmes or efficiency drives.
Chief Minister Alf Cannon rounding off the third Isle of Man Government Conference. So what do you think? Do you think the reprioritising exercise undertaken by the Council of Ministers has struck the right balance? Do you think we're heading for bright sunlit pastures or plummeting into the abyss? We're certainly sailing through choppy economic waters, but have we got a capable team steering the ship? I'm Phil Gaughan. Gora Maios and Geishachrom. Thanks for listening.